In the quiet valley village of Thistledown, where the hills rolled like sleepy green waves and lanterns floated on the river every full moon, every child was born with a song. Not a lullaby or a rhyme, but a secret melody, their heart's song, a tune that lived inside them and revealed itself in time. Some children discovered their songs early. Others took years. But no one in Thistledown ever grew up completely silent. No one, except Mirael. Mirael was 12 winters old, with soft brown eyes like polished oak and hair that tumbled like wild ivy down her back. She was quiet, more often seen than heard, and wherever she went, people seemed to look twice, not because she stood out, but because she didn't. Her sister, Lyra, had discovered her heart song at the age of 6. It danced like sunlight over the river, high, sweet, and full of laughter. Lyra became the pride of the village, singing at every festival, her voice ringing like bells through the hills. Mirael, meanwhile, listened. She tried to hum, to sing, to play the village reed flutes and drums. But no melody came, no echo in her chest, no flicker of warmth behind her ribs like the others described. Only silence. And that silence grew heavier each year, until it curled around her like fog. "You mustn't worry," her mother would say gently, brushing Mirael's hair at night. "Sometimes the strongest songs take the longest to find you." But Mirael didn't believe that anymore. She began to avoid the music hall. She stayed home during singing lessons. And when the village children played song tag, where each child added their tune to the game, she pretended she had chores to do. Then came the Moonlight Festival. Every year, on the longest night of summer, the children of Thistledown stood in the lantern square and shared their heart songs. The river would carry their melodies downstream, where the flowers of the marsh were said to bloom in reply. It was the most joyful night of the year. And this year, Mirael was chosen to open the festival. The moment her name was called, her heart froze. "Mirael Everglade," the announcer declared from the stage. "Come forth and share your song." The crowd clapped politely. Lyra waved from the front row, mouthing, "You can do it." Mirael stepped onto the wooden stage, her legs stiff and hollow. The village elders smiled encouragingly. Someone handed her a flute carved with silver stars. She stared at it. A breeze stirred her hair. The lanterns swayed. A hush fell over the crowd, waiting for her music. She raised the flute to her lips, and nothing came. No note, no whisper, no song, just air, just failure. She tried again, closing her eyes, hoping something, anything, would happen. But all she felt was emptiness. Laughter rippled through the crowd. A boy near the front snorted. "She's pretending," he said. "She has no song at all. She's broken," muttered another. Mirael lowered the flute and looked out at the sea of faces, all expectant, all disappointed. Her eyes stung. Her chest ached. She turned and fled. Down the steps, past the flower stalls, through the winding streets, into the shadowed woods that bordered Thistledown. She ran without looking back. Branches scratched her arms. Tears blurred her vision. Still she ran, past the old hollow trees and into the thick, silent heart of the forest, until she could no longer hear the music of the village. Until the silence finally matched what she felt inside. Mirael collapsed beside a mossy stone and hugged her knees, burying her face. The cold wrapped around her like a second skin. "I'll never have a song," she whispered. And then, something stirred. A faint glimmer of light ahead. Tiny, like a firefly. Then another, and another, floating in the mist like stars fallen to earth. A path of glowing flowers. They pulsed softly, almost in rhythm, like a heartbeat she could barely hear. Mirael blinked, stood, and followed. The deeper Mirael walked into the forest, the more the air changed. The night was no longer cold, it was cool and humming, like a lullaby made of wind. The moon filtered through the canopy in wide, silvery beams, painting the path ahead in shades of pearl and shadow. And the glowing flowers, pale blue blooms with petals shaped like stars, continued to pulse gently beneath her feet, one by one, lighting her way. Mirael didn't know why she followed them. She only knew that for the first time in her life, she felt like something was calling to her, not with words, but with feeling. A quiet, wordless warmth that said, "Come. You are welcome here." The trail curved deeper into the woods, where the trees grew stranger. Their bark shimmered with silver lines like veins, and the leaves whispered even when no wind blew. Strange shapes darted between trunks, too quick to see, but too graceful to be threatening. Everything felt alive, and yet, peaceful. Suddenly, a faint sound drifted through the mist, not quite music, not quite birdsong. Mirael froze. The sound came again, clearer now, a light, fluttering trill, like a flute played by wings. She turned a corner in the path, and stopped. Perched on a silvered branch was a lark, small and golden, with feathers that glowed faintly like candlelight. Its eyes sparkled with a strange intelligence, and when it tilted its head, it spoke. "You hear it now, don't you?" said the lark. Mirael blinked. "You speak. All larks speak," it chirped matter-of-factly. "You've just never listened with the right kind of ears." Muriel's mouth opened, then shut. Maybe she had hit her head. Or maybe she was dreaming. But part of her didn't care. "Are you real?" she asked softly. The lark fluttered down and landed on a mossy stone beside her. "As real as any hope you've forgotten," it said. "Now, tell me, Mirael Everglade, why are you crying on a night like this?" She looked away. I don't have a song," she murmured. "Everyone else in my village has one. They sing, they shine. I don't." The lark was quiet for a moment. Then it said, "That's not true." "It is." "No," said the lark firmly, ruffling its wings. "You do have a song. It's just not ready to be heard yet. Some melodies take time, some are buried deep, and some need to be found." "Found?" Mirael asked. The lark gestured with a wing. "Follow the path. Follow the flowers. The moon garden only appears to those who carry a song in silence, those who've been listening even when the world thought they had nothing to say." Mirael stared at the glowing trail. Moon garden. The lark hopped onto her shoulder. A place of light, music, and memory, where every song that's ever been lost still echoes in bloom. Only a few can find it. Fewer still are brave enough to enter. Mirael hesitated. Her heart was still heavy. Her shame still fresh. But something bright and trembling, flickered behind her ribs. "Will I find my song there?" she whispered. "If you walk with courage," said the lark. "And if you learn to listen, not just to the music around you, but the music within you." So Mirael nodded, and she walked. The path narrowed, leading between trees whose trunks were carved with symbols, spirals, stars, and strange runes that glowed softly as she passed. The lark hummed on her shoulder, and the flowers beneath her feet bloomed wider, their petals glowing brighter. Then, ahead, the mist thickened, not dark, but silver, as if moonlight had fallen into threads and woven a veil. "Step through," said the lark. Mirael reached out. The mist parted, and her breath caught. Before her stretched a valley bathed in moonlight, and floating in its center, suspended above a rippling lake of silver water, was a garden. Not an ordinary garden, but one unlike anything she'd imagined. Petals like glass shimmered in midair. Trees with crystal leaves chimed in the breeze. Vines glowed with soft green light, and wind chimes spun in invisible currents, playing gentle notes that made Muriel's skin tingle. It wasn't loud. It wasn't grand. It was gentle, like the sound of hope awakening after a long silence. "The moon garden," whispered the lark. Mirael stepped forward, crossing a bridge made of woven light. As she placed her foot on the garden's edge, something shifted in her chest, a low hum, faint but steady, like the start of a tune she almost remembered. And for the first time in her life, she didn't feel afraid of the silence. She felt like it was listening. Mirael stepped softly into the garden, her feet sinking into grass that shimmered like spun silver. Every blade felt alive, gently bending beneath her weight, releasing tiny motes of glowing dust that swirled into the air like fireflies. She stood still, in awe. The moon garden was silent, but not empty. The silence was rich, full of layers she could almost hear. It felt like standing inside a sleeping song, one waiting to be awakened. The trees were tall and elegant, their trunks smooth and pale like marble, their leaves shaped like musical notes, gently swaying. Vines draped between them like ribbons, and in place of fruit, they grew shining crystal orbs that chimed when touched by the breeze. Flowers floated in midair, their petals unfolding slowly, glowing brighter each time Muriel's heartbeat quickened. She took a deep breath, and even the air was different, cool and full of the scent of honey, moss, and moonlight. "It's beautiful," she whispered. The golden lark perched on her shoulder fluttered its wings proudly. "This is the heart of forgotten harmony. The moon garden grows from every song that has ever been silenced, every unsung melody, every unspoken dream, every quiet hope someone was too afraid to share." Muriel turned in a slow circle. "How is that possible?" "Because songs are living things," said the lark. "They don't disappear. They wait." Just then, a soft sound reached Muriel's ears, like wind brushing over strings. She followed it and came upon a boy, older than her by a few years, kneeling beneath a willow tree that glowed faintly blue. The boy had white hair that fell across his face like snow, and he moved silently, tending to a patch of flowers that shimmered with musical notes etched into their petals. Chimes hanging from the willow's branches sang quietly with each movement he made. The lark fluttered to the ground. "That's Kalen. He's the caretaker." Kalen looked up, his eyes pale and soft, like mist. He didn't speak. He only nodded in greeting, then returned to his work. Muriel approached cautiously. "Do you live here?" He didn't answer. The lark tilted its head. "He doesn't speak. Not with words. Not anymore. But he listens better than anyone I know." Muriel crouched beside Kalen. He handed her a small silver blossom, no larger than her palm, and gestured for her to press it to her chest. She did. At once, a warm pulse spread through her ribs, and for a moment, she heard something, a faint, wavering note. It was delicate, almost shy, but it was hers. She gasped. "That's my song." Kalen smiled gently and nodded. Tears sprang to her eyes. "But it's so faint. Everyone else's songs are loud and bright. Mine's barely there." The lark landed beside her. "It's not weak. It's hidden. The louder the world, the deeper some songs must go to stay safe." Muriel looked around. "So how do I bring it out?" Kalen stood and beckoned her toward the center of the garden. Muriel followed, past glowing lily pads floating in the air, past bushes of silver string vines that thrummed like harps, until they reached a wide circle of smooth stone tiles. In the middle stood an enormous tree with bark that looked like braided moonlight. From its branches hung hundreds of small wind chimes, each a different shape, each glowing with a different hue. They swayed in perfect silence, not a single sound escaped them. Kalen pointed to the chimes, then to Muriel. "He wants you to play," said the lark. "Or at least, to try." Muriel's heart thudded in her chest. "I don't know how." "You don't have to," said the lark. "Just close your eyes and breathe." So she did. She stepped into the circle, closed her eyes, and breathed deeply. At first, all she heard was the sound of her own nervous heartbeat. But then, beneath it, something stirred. A note. A single, soft, tremulous sound. Her hands rose on their own. Her fingers brushed the nearest chime. A tone rang out, gentle and uncertain, but clear. Another chime answered. Then another. The air shimmered, and slowly, carefully, the garden began to respond. Petals lifted, lights danced, the vines shifted and sang. The garden was listening, and joining her. Kalen stood at the edge of the circle, watching her with wide eyes. Muriel opened hers and stared in wonder. "I didn't think I could do that." "You didn't do it," said the lark. "You allowed it. That was your song listening to you." Muriel felt something spark inside her. Something small, but steady. But before she could say more, a gust of cold wind swept through the garden. The chimes fell silent, the lights dimmed, and a sickly shadow crept across the outer edges of the garden. Kalen stiffened. The lark turned sharply. "No, it's too soon. It's already found this place." Muriel looked around, confused. "What's happening?" "The songs," said the lark. "They're being stolen. Something is feeding on the silence." And from the edge of the garden, in the deep mist, two red eyes blinked open. The red eyes in the mist blinked slowly, once, then twice, before vanishing again into the swirling fog. But the cold they left behind lingered, curling through the moon garden like dark fingers. Muriel stepped back instinctively, her gaze darting to Kalen. His face had gone pale. He raised a hand and pointed toward the edge of the garden, where the glowing flowers had begun to dim. The lark fluttered higher, its wings twitching with alarm. "It's Disan," it whispered. "The shadow that feeds on broken melodies. The one who silences songs before they're born." Muriel's breath caught. "But, how did it find this place?" "It always finds doubt," the lark said grimly. "It listens for the cracks in your voice. It grows stronger every time a song is hidden, every time someone believes their voice doesn't matter." Muriel looked down at her hands. Just moments ago, she had felt her melody stir, quiet, uncertain, but alive. And now, it trembled again, like a flame threatened by wind. In the distance, one of the crystal trees began to wilt. The leaves dimmed, their shimmering edges turning gray. The chimes stopped singing. Then came a whisper. Not words, just silence. Thick, heavy, suffocating silence. It rolled through the garden like fog, swallowing the wind, flattening the music, pulling the light from every glowing petal. Muriel could feel it pressing against her ears, muffling her thoughts, dulling her courage. Kalen stepped forward, placing himself between Muriel and the creeping dark. He raised one hand and touched a string vine, pulling it gently. A faint note rang out, soft, but steady. The shadow paused. Then, like a snake coiling backward, it withdrew into the mist. The silence loosened its grip. Muriel exhaled. "What was that?" "Disan feeds on the fear of not being heard," said the lark, landing once more on her shoulder. "When someone believes they are voiceless, Disan listens. And when enough fear gathers in one place, it comes." "But why me?" Muriel asked quietly. "I never had a song. Maybe I really don't belong here." The lark gave her a long, patient look. "That's exactly what it wants you to believe." Kalen shook his head fiercely. He took Muriel's hand and guided her to one of the dimmed flower beds. The blooms had curled inward, their glow nearly gone. Kalen pressed his hand to his chest, then to the flower. Nothing happened. Then he looked at Muriel and motioned for her to try. Muriel hesitated. "But what if I make it worse?" "You won't," said the lark. "Because your song is already reaching out. All it needs is your permission." Swallowing her fear, Muriel knelt beside the wilted bloom. She placed a trembling hand over it, then closed her eyes and listened. For a moment, she heard only silence. Then, from a tiny note, low, but full, it pulsed beneath her palm like a heartbeat. And the flower, just barely, opened. A single petal lifted, glowing faintly. Kalen smiled, his eyes full of wonder. "You see," the lark said, voice soft with pride. "You don't need to shout to be heard. Sometimes, the quietest voices are the ones that bring songs back to life." Muriel exhaled a shaky breath. For the first time, she didn't feel broken. She felt beginning. But her relief didn't last long. Far across the garden, a large patch of light extinguished all at once. The vines sagged, the wind chimes cracked, and from the mist came a shape. It slithered through the air, black and formless, like smoke given weight. Eyes blinked open across its body, red, unblinking, searching. It had no mouth, yet the silence it brought was deafening. It hovered above the garden and released a soundless howl. The garden winced. Trees trembled. Music recoiled. More flowers dimmed. The lark beat its wings furiously. "We have to stop it. But we can't do it alone." Muriel looked around. "Where are the others?" "There were others," said the lark gravely. "But many left before their songs were ready. They couldn't face the silence." Muriel turned to Kalen. "You stayed." Kalen nodded. He raised his pipe, an instrument carved from starlit wood, and began to play. The melody was haunting and wordless, like moonlight dripping from tree branches. It reached the roots of the wilting vines and stirred the edges of the shadow. But it wasn't enough. The shadow surged forward, shrieking without sound. "Muriel," the lark cried, "you must play too, even if it's broken, even if it's small. Let your song be heard." Muriel's fingers trembled as she raised the reed flute from her belt. It was the same one she had tried to play at the Moonlight Festival. The same one she had failed to use. But this time, she didn't think about the crowd. She thought about the flower that bloomed when she touched it. She thought about Kaylin's silent strength. She thought about her own melody, timid, fragile, waiting. And she played. A soft note spilled into the air, wavering, then another, and another. The music was unsure, but it was hers. The garden responded, petals unfurled, wind chimes rang, the light returned to a dozen flowers at once. And Disin screamed. The shadow reeled back, shriveling, its red eyes flaring. Kaylin stepped forward, his own melody rising to meet hers. Their songs braided together, two quiet, uncertain voices forming one clear, growing tune. The shadow faltered, then vanished into the mist. The silence lifted, the garden sighed, and Mirael, still holding the flute, felt her chest ache, not with fear, but with wonder. Her melody wasn't gone. It was just beginning. The days in the moon garden passed like dreams. Time didn't move the same way there. The moon always hung low in the sky, bathing everything in silver light, and Mirael never felt hungry or tired. But something else was changing, not outside, but within her. Every day, she practiced. She sat with Kaylin beneath the shimmering willow, letting her flute sing soft, hesitant notes that slowly grew stronger. She tended the flowers that pulsed with music, learning to feel their rhythm. And sometimes, she simply listened, not with her ears, but with her heart. But Disin's attack had left part of the garden darkened. No matter how much Mirael or Kaylin played, a cluster of trees near the lake remained gray and brittle, their melodies trapped beneath a weight of silence. The lark perched on a crystal branch and watched the fading chimes. "We need help," it said gravely. "The garden can't survive another shadowing. Not unless someone truly remembers what it means to fight Disin's silence." Mirael set down her flute. "Who could do that?" "There's someone," said the lark. "Someone who once faced the shadow and lived to sing again. Her name is Mira the harpist. She dwells beyond the garden, deep in Hollow Glen." Kaylin's eyes widened. He looked toward the distant trees, then shook his head slowly. He pointed to his temple, then drew a line across the sky. "She's not, well," Mirael guessed. "She's not broken," said the lark gently. "But her heart bears scars from silence. Still, if anyone can help you find the notes Disin buried, it's her." Mirael nodded. "Then I'll go." "I'm going with you," chirped the lark, fluttering to her shoulder. Kaylin stepped forward, a question in his eyes. Mirael smiled. "You need to stay and protect the garden. If Disin comes back." Kaylin hesitated, then nodded solemnly. With a deep breath, Mirael turned and followed the outer path that led beyond the moon garden's edge, into a part of the forest that no longer shimmered. The glowing flowers faded the farther she walked. The mist thickened, trees bent inward, their branches twisted like reaching hands. The air smelled of old rain and forgotten dreams. After what felt like hours, Mirael and the lark reached the mouth of Hollow Glen. It was a dark ravine with steep stone walls and trees that grew sideways. Moss blanketed everything, and strange echoes drifted from deep within, as if the glen itself was murmuring old secrets. The lark lowered its voice. "Tread softly, the glen remembers pain." Mirael walked carefully between the trees, her flute clutched tight. Then, music. Faint, distant, yet unmistakably a harp. The sound floated down from a ledge above. Mirael looked up and saw her. An old woman with silver hair and a blindfold of moonlace sat on a crooked stone bench, plucking the strings of a harp that glowed like starlight. Each note she played wove through the air like strands of silk, weaving patterns Mirael could almost see. The lark flapped forward. "Harpist Mira, we need your help." The woman paused, her fingers stilling. "My name has not been spoken here in a long time." Mirael stepped forward. "I'm Mirael. I came from the moon garden." The harpist tilted her head. "You've been inside." "Yes, but it's weakening." The shadow came. "Disin. It stole parts of the song. We tried to fight it, but we couldn't bring all the melodies back." The harpist stood slowly. "And what would you have of me, child?" "Teach me," Mirael said. "Teach me how to hear the songs that are hidden. I want to bring them back." There was a long silence. Then the harpist said, "Come." She led Mirael to a clearing shaped like a broken circle. Stones carved with symbols surrounded them, and in the center sat a smaller harp, one with silver strings. And a soft blue glow. Sit, Mira said gently. This is the harp of echoes. Play it, and it will reveal the sound of your own silence. Mirael sat down, her hands shaking. She plucked the first string. A low, trembling note rang out, not clear, but clouded with emotion. With every string she touched, more echoes spilled out, of laughter that had turned to shame, of words she'd tried to speak but swallowed, of moments when she'd shrunk smaller and smaller just to survive. Tears welled in her eyes. It's all broken. No, said Mira, it's honest. Brokenness is not weakness. What you're hearing are the truths your heart tried to hide. But how can I turn this into a melody? By forgiving it, Mira whispered. Your song isn't something you perform. It's something you accept. Even the quiet, even the sorrow. All of it is music. Mirael closed her eyes. She played again. This time, the notes were raw. Unpolished, but real. And from that sound, the air began to shimmer. The moss lifted. The glen brightened. Mira smiled. Now, take that song. And give it to the garden. With the harp of echoes song still humming gently in her chest, Mirael left Hollow Glen beneath a sky washed with moonlight. The lark flew in slow circles above her, silent for once, letting her thoughts drift like leaves on a current. They did not return to the moon garden. Not yet. Instead, the lark guided Mirael to a place even deeper, older, and more forgotten than the glen, a place where stolen songs were imprisoned. The echo caverns, said the lark, hovering above a jagged crevice between two boulders veiled in moss. Where Dison hides the fragments it steals, the notes, the whispers, the beginnings of songs that never found their end. Mirael stared into the darkness beyond the rocks. It was not black, but blue, a deep, silvery blue that shimmered like water and pulsed like breath. What happens in there? She asked. Echoes, said the lark. Not just of sound, of memory. You'll hear what was lost, and what you feared most to remember. Mirael took a breath. I have to go in, don't I? The lark nodded. The song you need to heal the moon garden is trapped inside. But be warned, Dison's silence is heaviest here. You must hold on to your truth, or the echoes will drown it. With trembling fingers, Mirael stepped into the crack between the stones. At once, sound changed. No wind, no footsteps, no birdsong, only her breathing, slow, hollow, too loud. The walls of the cavern pulsed with a strange shimmer, like stone made of frozen light. Her own reflection flickered in the smooth surfaces, not just her face, but the expressions she wore in her loneliest moments. And then, the echoes began. First, a whisper. She's pretending. She has no song at all. Mirael froze. That voice. The boy from the Moonlight Festival. Another whisper. She's broken. Her hands trembled. A third voice, crueler still, her own voice. I'll never have a song. The walls reflected not just her face, but her doubts. They flickered like lanterns in a storm. One moment a child cowering behind a curtain at choir practice, the next a girl watching her sister shine on the festival stage while shrinking smaller and smaller. And there, ahead of her, a figure stood. Mirael, but not quite. This reflection wore the same clothes, held the same flute, but her eyes were hollow. Her mouth curled with bitter sadness. You don't belong in the moon garden, the reflection said. You're the silence. You'll never be a melody. Mirael gripped the flute in her hand. The air felt tight. The cavern pressed inward, and the walls began to echo that cruel voice in growing waves. You're not enough. You don't shine. Why try at all? Her knees buckled. Tears welled. I shouldn't have come, she whispered. And then, she remembered the harpist's voice in Hollow Glen. Greater than, brokenness is not weakness. All of it is music. Mirael closed her eyes. She took one breath, then another, and she raised her flute. Her fingers found the notes she had practiced by the willow tree. Not perfect notes, but honest ones. And she played, a slow, aching tune. It was the sound of fear turned into courage. Of silence turned into truth. Of all the things she had hidden, finally stepping into the light. The echoes stopped. The reflection melted, and the cavern lit up. Dozens, no, hundreds, of glowing orbs floated from the walls, drifting around her like dandelion seeds. Each one sang a single, sweet note. Together, they formed a harmony that shimmered through the cavern like morning sun. "These are the lost fragments," the lark said in awe. "The seeds of forgotten songs." Mirael held out her hands. The notes gathered to her like old friends. They danced around her flute, settled into her chest, and hummed a promise. "We're still here." From deep within the cavern, a single flower bloomed, silver, with petals shaped like crescent moons. In its heart sat a glowing shard of light. The lark gasped. The note of renewal. Mirael picked it up. It was warm and pulsed gently, a living melody. She tucked it close to her heart, and as she turned to leave, the caverns bowed in silence, not the silence of Dissen, but the stillness of healing. When she stepped back into the moonlit woods, the air smelled sweet again. The trees whispered welcome, and above her, a soft, familiar chime sounded far away. The moon garden was calling her home. The moment Mirael crossed back into the moon garden, she felt the change. The garden had dimmed again, but not like before. This time, the light was still present, flickering like the last embers of a fire waiting to be stoked. The trees bowed softly as she passed, and the petals of the floating flowers gently turned toward her, as if recognizing something new in her presence. She clutched the note of renewal to her chest. It pulsed softly, matching the beat of her heart. "Mirael," the lark chirped, fluttering above her. "You did it. I can feel it, the lost fragments, the echo you reclaimed." Kalen stood waiting under the willow tree, his expression tense but hopeful. His pipe hung from his neck, and around him, the garden was trying to bloom, hesitant blossoms trembling open, vines reaching toward the sky, wind chimes shaking with quiet effort. Mirael ran to him, breathless. "I found it. The lost song, the note of renewal. The harpist in Hollow Glen helped me see, I wasn't broken. Just quiet." Kalen smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. Instead, he reached into his satchel and pulled something out, a shard of a chime. It was cracked, the edges charred with black. Mirael tilted her head. "What is that?" The lark, upon seeing it, fluttered backward. "No," Kalen nodded solemnly. The lark turned to Mirael. "That's a piece of a soul chime, one of the oldest instruments of the moon garden. They are born from trust and truth. For one to break," the lark paused. "It means betrayal." Mirael looked at Kalen. You broke it." Kalen's shoulders sank. He nodded once, then lifted his hand to his throat, tracing a circle over his heart, then sweeping outward. "He says he was the reason Dissen found the garden," translated the lark softly. "He let it in." Mirael stared, stunned. "But why?" Kalen turned and walked a few paces to the crystal tree. It was the only tree in the garden still completely dark, its branches twisted, its chimes silent and cracked. He placed his hand against its trunk and closed his eyes. And the garden listened. A gentle ripple of light emerged, forming pictures in the air, memories shaped from sound. Mirael watched as the images danced before her. A younger Kalen, laughing, playing melodies on a harp of silver and stars. A garden in full bloom, radiant and alive. But then, a storm. Not of wind or water, but doubt. She saw Kalen standing among elders, his voice rising in anger. He had wanted to share the moon garden with outsiders, to invite all those who had no voice, no music, to find their songs here. But the elders refused, saying the garden's magic was fragile, meant only for the chosen. Kalen had left in pain, his heart burning. And in that moment of despair, the shadow came. Dissen had found its way in, not through hatred, but through hopelessness. Through Kalen's wounded silence. Mirael stepped forward as the images faded. "You let it in, because you believed others deserved a chance to be heard." Kalen nodded slowly. The lark perched beside him. "He's carried the silence ever since. That's why he doesn't speak. He blames himself. But he stayed," Mirael whispered. "He stayed and protected what was left." Kalen turned toward her, eyes filled with guilt and longing. Mirael walked closer. She reached into her satchel and brought out the glowing note of renewal. "You made a mistake," she said gently. "But you listened after. You didn't abandon the garden. You fought to keep it breathing. Just like I did." Kalen stared at the note. His hands trembled. Mirael placed it into his palms. Together, they walked to the crystal tree. They pressed the note of renewal into the base of the trunk. Nothing happened. Then, light. Not sudden, but rising slowly, like dawn breaking over a quiet hill. The tree pulsed. The chimes shook. A single, clear note rang out, pure and beautiful, and the darkness melted from the bark. Color returned. The tree was whole, and in that moment, Kalen stepped back and raised his pipe. Mirael lifted her flute. Their melodies joined. Not perfect, not grand, but true. And the garden responded. It bloomed. The moon garden had never been so alive. The trees shimmered with renewed color, glowing from within like they held the very stars. The wind chimes swayed gently in a chorus of harmony, their notes weaving through the air like ribbons of hope. Every petal, every vine, every floating blossom responded to Mirael and Kalen's joined melody, not just with sound, but with light. And at the center of it all stood the crystal tree, now fully restored. Its branches reached high into the silver mist, and from them hung new soul chimes, each one glowing like a promise fulfilled. Mirael held her flute close to her chest, her fingers warm with music. The note of renewal had healed the heart of the garden, but she could feel something lingering. One final strand, one last melody not yet sung. The lark flew down and perched on her shoulder. "You've done it," it said softly. "The garden is whole again." "Almost," Mirael whispered. "There's something missing. I can feel it." One last note. She looked toward the far end of the garden, the place where the shadow had first entered. The vines there still hung low, the petals closed tight, the air thick with quiet. It wasn't darkness now, it was waiting. Kalen joined her, his expression thoughtful. He gestured toward his heart, then toward her. "He says the final note must come from you," the lark translated. "Your own song. Not borrowed, not broken, not echo or memory. You." Muriel's heart pounded. She had played many times since arriving, hesitantly, slowly, sometimes trembling. But this would be different. This would be her voice, laid bare and unguarded. She took a breath, and stepped forward. As she walked to the quiet edge of the garden, the world hushed. The trees leaned in, the blossoms paused their glow. Even the wind waited. Mirael closed her eyes and lifted her flute. She thought of everything, the silence of her childhood, the weight of not being heard, the pain of pretending she didn't care. The shame of that night on the festival stage. The fear in the echo caverns. The trust she had found in Kalen's silence. The wisdom of the harpist. The moment the flower bloomed beneath her touch. And then, the truth. She had always had a song. It had lived in her stillness. It had grown in her listening. It had waited, patiently, for the right moment to rise. She pressed the flute to her lips. And played. A single note. Clear. True. The note rose like dawn. Soft. Golden. And full of the kind of strength that comes from kindness. It moved through the air, wrapping itself around every tree, every vine, every blossom. The chimes picked up the melody. The crystal branches echoed it. And then, Mirael began to sing. Not with words, with feeling. A wordless song that came from the deepest part of her, shaped by silence, fed by longing, and lit by love. The garden bloomed brighter than ever before. The vines lifted. The final petals opened. The last corner of the garden was whole. And far, far away, a breeze stirred in the village of Thistledown, carrying with it a tune no one had ever heard, yet somehow knew. Muriel's heart song had found its way home. She lowered the flute. Kalen's eyes shimmered with quiet joy. The lark circled once above her, then whispered, "Your melody, it's yours. But now it belongs to others too. Just like all true songs." The moon garden rang with one last, long note, not an end, but a beginning. And in that note, Mirael heard everything. The silence that had shaped her. The courage that had carried her. And the harmony that would follow her, always. The moon was high over the garden, casting soft silver across every petal, every leaf, every thread of melody still drifting in the air. Mirael stood at the heart of it all, the last note of her song still echoing gently through the trees. She felt it, not just in her ears, but in her bones. Her own melody, complete, free. And yet, as the garden began to settle into peace, something deeper stirred within her. This song, She whispered. It doesn't feel like it's ending. The lark fluttered down beside her, its golden feathers glowing with the moon's light. That's because it isn't. You've begun it. That was your first full breath, Mirael. The rest is still being written. Kaelin nodded beside her, and for the first time, he smiled without sadness. He raised his pipe to his lips and added a soft note to the air, a harmony, not a conclusion. The garden responded. One by one, the soul chimes began to ring again. The vines moved like dancers. The stars seemed to draw closer. The moon garden wasn't just restored, it was awakening. More will come now, said the lark. More children, more quiet hearts, more voices that don't yet know their worth. They'll follow the mist. They'll hear the call, like I did, Mirael said softly. The lark turned its head. And when they do, they'll need someone to show them how to listen. Mirael blinked. Me, you, the lark said with certainty. The girl who once believed she had no song, now sings with the moon. Who better to guide the silent than the one who lived in silence and bloomed from it? Mirael felt the truth of it settle gently into her chest, not as a burden, but as a gift. She turned to Kaelin. He reached into his satchel and pulled out a small charm, a chime, newly formed, etched with symbols from the crystal tree. He tied it gently to a silver thread and placed it in Mirael's hand. A caretaker's chime. She looked at it, stunned. Are you sure? Kaelin smiled and nodded. You'll stay, too, she asked. He placed a hand to his heart, then to hers, a silent promise. They would share the garden. Together. In the days that followed, the moon garden began to bloom brighter than ever before. Wordless songs filled the air at dawn and dusk. New soul chimes appeared on the branches. The vines grew in new patterns, some shaped like wings, others like open hands. And soon, the glowing mist once again crept beyond the forest edges. One morning, Mirael stood at the entrance of the silver path, the same place she had cried not so long ago. And in the distance, she saw a young boy standing in the shadows of the trees. He looked uncertain. His hands were clenched, his voice, still hidden. But Mirael smiled, and she reached out her hand. The same way the garden had once reached for her. Come, she said. The boy hesitated, then stepped forward. The moon garden lived on. Because a song, once begun, never truly ends. It changes. It echoes. It finds new voices. It waits for the quiet ones, the soft ones, the ones who thought they were invisible. And when they sing, the world changes. One note at a time. The end. Musical note. Moral lesson of the story. Even the quietest voices hold powerful songs. Silence does not mean emptiness, it often hides the deepest truths. Every person, no matter how unsure or unseen, has a melody within them waiting to rise. When we listen with our hearts and believe in our worth, we help the world bloom in ways no one else can. For more motivation stories, please like, share and subscribe this channel. Thanks and God bless.